equally harsh if there was a Democrat in office doing similar things. But this comes off as partisan perhaps, but it's only because of the actions that have been taken. So without further ado, we'll do rule of law, building it and backsliding from it. This is what I'd like to do in this short period of time is race through 6 different questions. And there's too much text on my slides, don't worry about it. I can provide the slides, and if people are interested in reading them, they'll actually make sense because there's enough text to keep it going. So I think it's really important to, as a first question, to ask what orders behavior before getting into what rule of law is. So we'll do what orders behavior, what is rule of law, what techniques are used to backslide from rule of law, and they're classic backsliding techniques that we can observe across countries. Through a rule of law lens, how might one think about backsliding today in the U.S.? And I'll give you a framework that I use that I find helpful with the chaos we seem to wake up to every morning. Are there guardrails that still exist to executive authority, or is it really collapsing? And then finally, is there hope? That slide is really a hard one, but maybe you'll help me through it in our discussion. Maybe we'll discover more hope than I see at the outset here. So what orders behavior? Why do we behave the way we do? In the beginning, I don't mean to quote Genesis, but in the beginning for me, there was Max Weber. Now, Max Weber was a legal sociologist who lived in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. He died at the age of 56, the same age as Steve Jobs when he died. And by the age of 56, he had written a stack of books like this. And he's been very influential in my thinking about rule of law in developing societies, and it applies to developed as well. And this is a distillation of thousands of pages of Max Weber that I'm sparing you with a very short slide. But the basic normative guidance in society, Weber observed that there are 3 categories of behavior that are ordered according to habit, taken for granted, actions that we have, convention, and this is one that I'll really stress in this lecture, seeking approval, fearing disapproval. I always ask my Stanford students, why do you have the table manners you have in restaurants? And they'll fumble around for a while and give me some very fancy answers as well, but basically people have table manners in restaurants because they're seeking approval and fearing disapproval. But norms are very much tied to convention, and norms are collective expectations about proper behavior. And then we have law. Shared values and norms are elemental, foundational to rule of law. And an example I give is, and we have some lawyers in the audience, is the independence of the Department of Justice. There's a deeply baked norm within the department. And now the Department of Justice explicitly serves the president. That was quite contrary to norms. Traditionally, the Department of Justice had just a very thin layer of political appointees, about 10 out of 350 in the department. Bureaucratic continuity is extraordinarily important to rule of law. and that regular bureaucratic interface is at the foundation of rule of law. So this is from the Department of Justice manual. This is baked in norms in the Department of Justice manual about communication with the White House. And it was very restricted, and trying to avoid any appearance of partisanship whatsoever. The Department of Justice was, in my view, a shining example of professionalism. This is a quote from my friend Frank Fukuyama, and I think it's really important to think about what's being eroded here. Frank says the kind of internalized norms that motivate workers to do more than the minimum does not come easily, and it's a product of education, training, and a socialization process that's both a part of the profession and partly absorbed from the surrounding society. And then we flash forward to today, and judges are actually in doubt of the government because DOJ prosecutors are misleading them. And it's just unprecedented that you would have U.S. attorneys misleading the court. They're very suspicious of the quality of representation and what's being represented to them. So it's really an unprecedented space. By one count, and this is pretty shocking, I had to do a little bit of research here because I talk about 40 or 50 different countries usually in my lectures, and now I'm focused on the US. But I knew that court orders were being not followed by the administration, but I had no idea it was so many. 1 out of every 3 court orders are not being followed. We've never seen this in the modern history of the U.S. And we've got an enforcement problem too. So court orders, if there's not compliance, U.S. Marshal would usually follow up and make sure that there was enforcement. But the U.S. Marshal is under the executive, so it's a problem that we can't easily work our way out of. I just want to mention cultural identity. We've been through just scores of culture wars. We're all exhausted by them. But culture wars encourage populism, the us-them sort of thing, and undermine norms and rule of law. People conform their beliefs now more about disputed matters of fact to their cultural identities. So this really, I don't mean to get too sociological here, but at the foundation of rule of law, you've got to have some agreement within society. So is global warming a threat? Yes, according to over 99% of credible scientists. Does the death penalty deter murder? Well, Gary Becker, a wonderful Nobel laureate from the University of Chicago back in the 1990s, said it did deter murder. My friend John Donahue on the Stanford Law faculty has shown through extensive empirical research that the death penalty doesn't deter murder. Does gun control make society safer or less safe? We know it makes it safer, and lots of empirical evidence to show that. And then, ridiculous things like, did Joe Biden win the 2020 election? All of this seems to be up for grabs when it should be well settled. Norms and law. Okay, so convention and norms may be far more determinative of conduct than laws on the books. And formal law guarantees no more than a fraction of actual conduct and may actually be what my friend Julio Fountas at Warwick University calls the fatal attraction. That is, it's very easy to pass a law. it's very difficult to enforce it and make sure that the behavior follows. And I'll just give an example from Afghanistan. There were laws about women's rights passed during the past regime that were so, I don't want to say out of sync because they were well-intentioned, the laws, but the norms were so different. The gap was so great. And one hears from developing countries, from one developing country to the next, well, we have some good laws on the books, but they aren't enforced. And it is this gap between the norms and the laws that creates enforcement problems. So, what is rule of law? Lon Fuller wrote a lot about rule of law back in the 1960s, and much of this is drawn from him. Formal legality is publicly, laws are publicly available, they're general in scope, their perspective, that is, they're known in advance, they aren't after the fact, and they're certain in application. Applied equally. Now, applied equally, I think, is one of the most challenging things in rule of law, not just in developing countries, but in our own. And we see that the number of resources you have can matter a lot in the quality of representation you get and the outcomes in various suits. And we see it today. Jim Comey, who's being targeted for prosecution, will be able to hire the best legal talent to defend him. But he's in a unique position. There are a lot of people who are not able to do that. And then I put it here because it's so important: independent judicial, investigative, and prosecutorial review and enforcement. Democratic formal legality emphasizes attempts to maximize the consent of the governed. So political scientists really look to constraining the exercise of power by political actors. And economists, of course, look to property rights and enforcement of contracts. There's some definitional debate. A thin rule of law would be something like Brian Tamanaha has espoused, that is, government officials and citizens are bound by and abide by law. And a thicker rule of law would be consistent with international human rights norms, standards, and some participation in decision making. So what elements of rule of law seem to matter today to the public? And I look at this every day, and in our discussion, maybe you all will have more ideas than I have on what really grabs the public and rule of law. I think due process matters to people, and we see it in what ICE agents are doing really offends the sensibilities of Americans, even those who were very pro-anti-immigration. So I think that crosses a border, and certainly some things in the realm of First Amendment and privacy. The problem is, even when there are judicial victories, there's fear of retribution. There's a chilling effect that is really hard to measure. People are in fear in the media, in academia. Law firms aren't taking pro bono cases that they would otherwise take because they're afraid of coming into the crosshairs of the administration, and even the military. And then we have, as an underlying dynamic, social media has suspended much of its content moderation, so we've got real information problems there. So what goods does the rule of law deliver? This is not an exclusive list, but these are things you might want to think about. Stability, citizen and national security, just regular old dispute resolution, Economic growth and development with predictable markets. I'll return to markets and how they might constrain the executive later. Human rights protection and protection from government caprice and corruption. So what techniques are used to backslide and oppose the rule of law? We've been in a period of democratic backsliding since about 2006, and I think rule of law backsliding has been going with it, though at a really accelerated pace now. The World Justice Project in 2020 ranked, the US fell out of the top 20 countries on rule of law, and it continues to go down. And I don't know what the World Justice Project ranking for this year, 2025, undoubtedly the rule of law's ranking for the US is going to plummet. So there's a background problem. There is no perfect institutional design. All designs have some problems and are imperfect. That's sort of a baseline. But there is a question: why do autocrats focus on judiciaries? And there is actually a legal explanation for it. And this is, the U.S. used to be a constitution that was modeled by other countries. It no longer is, because people see the problems that we're working through. And it is the oldest operating constitution in the world, and it's so difficult to amend, so we've got some structural issues. But judicial review was something that the U.S. exported to the world as generally a good idea. In 1946, only 25% of countries had judicial review, and now it's enshrined in 82% of countries. So there's a structural reason why autocrats are focused on judiciaries. They become more consequential. This is a favorite quote of mine from Sam Rayburn about the difficulties of building and how easy it is to break down. A jackass can kick down a barn, but it takes a good carpenter to build one. Here, these are generalized backsliding techniques around the world that a couple of friends at University of Chicago wrote about recently. The first is amending the Constitution to consolidate power. We can't amend the Constitution. There's a brilliant book coming out soon about the problems of amending the Constitution, how we should resuscitate it. There is circumventing checks and balances is, by to avoid parliamentary or legislative votes. We see that all the time in the current administration. Undermining the laws and legal institutions by consolidating power in the executive. That is certainly happening. Attacking prosecutors, purging the judiciary and the bureaucracy. The judiciary hasn't been purged, but certainly the Trump administration has suggested impeaching judges. Diminish both the size and integrity of the public sphere. And this is something that's really concerning. Attacking or controlling the media and academia, and then finally manipulating elections. This is broadly the playbook of backsliding in rule of law. Now, specifically, backsliding in techniques to control the judiciary, I'm not going to go through all of these, though when I teach students from around the world, I put up this slide and I just go country by country, tell me what's familiar here to you, and they will I could have hours-long discussions with these students because they'll all have stories from their respective countries. I'm just going to go to the last two. Ignore court orders. We've talked about that. Really serious, really a rule of law crisis in itself, and intimidating judges, which has become all too common in the U.S. And one really tragic case in New Jersey, where a federal judge, a purported pizza delivery person came to the door of a federal judge, and when the door opened, the person killed her son. So this is called the pizza box threat, where pizza boxes are now being sent to various federal court judges with the name of the son who was killed on the box. It's just absolutely shocking. And an assault on judicial review and intimidation. This is so common that I'm not even going to go over it. I think it's really well known. Through the rule of law lens, how might we think about backsliding in the U.S. today? So this story has to start with a decision that came down in July of 2024, Trump versus U.S., where the pace of unraveling and backsliding in rule of law in the U.S. has increased manyfold as a result of this decision, which is easily one of the worst decisions in my lifetime by the U.S. Supreme Court. It affected both the immunity of the president, giving absolute immunity from prosecution for any acts within exclusive constitutional authority of the president, and presumptive immunity for other official acts. Absolute immunity places the president outside the legal accountability for illegal acts. And this eliminates any rule of law restraints on Trump personally, other than those that he chooses to restrain himself by. And this is not being overly critical. We know that President Trump is not a self-restraining person. And self-restraint actually matters in leadership too. George Washington stepped down after 2 terms. He'd had enough. He thought it was time for someone else to take it. He wasn't constitutionally mandated to do so. And the self-restraining leaders, in my opinion, are the best. Trump versus the U.S. is also really problematic on presidential powers. So the court was taken with, and this is a quote from the court, unlike anyone else, the president is a branch of government, and the Constitution vests in him sweeping powers and duties. So this is now comes the unitary executive, which means essentially that all administrative agencies are directly under the president, and not only, so the president, if this unitary executive theory is embraced, the president can pretty much fire anyone at will, rather than having to show cause. And this theory comes out of, I just did some research on it, it comes out of a really thin explanation of something that James Madison wrote about years ago on, executive power vests in the president. And Madison, I think, has been misconstrued to say, the executive should have broad, very, very broad executive powers, because he's the author of one of the most influential Federalist papers, Federalist Paper 51, which lays out separation of powers. So, but anyway, this unitary executive idea came out of a group of lawyers in the Department of Justice during the Reagan era. and who was a member of the Department of Justice in the Reagan era in the 1980s? Chief Justice John Roberts. And here we have John Roberts. I always thought was an institutionalist, really cared about the institution of the Supreme Court and wanted to leave his legacy. But it turns out he may have wanted that, but what he wanted more than that was the implementation of a unitary executive. Where am I here? I can't underscore enough how tragic this decision is, and we're seeing the consequences of it every day. So originalism, we've got this combination of originalism and unitary executive. Originalism, I'm not going to say much about it. It's just that Anthony Scalia proposed, was a primary proponent of originalism, and it's essentially trying to divine what our founding fathers were thinking at the time the Constitution was written. And so what we usually get, this is my interpretation of how originalism works. Judges decide the outcome they want. They look to the text of the Constitution and figure out a way to get to the outcome that they want. How else can you explain? Originalists were the ones that are really at the base of the vast expansion of the Second Amendment. And they're right not just to bear arms, but to bear bump stocks, AK-47s, whatever it might be. How can you imagine that the founding fathers were thinking of bump stocks and these horrible weapons that are on the market? The unitary executive, likewise, when it comes to administrative structure, we've got a very complicated administrative structure. It's extraordinarily complicated, and it requires a lot of expertise. So the idea that the president can fire anyone at will undermines the ability of the bureaucracy to have the expertise that it needs. So it's extraordinarily damaging. So where are we? Well, the flood the zone strategy of the Trump administration leaves courts drinking from a fire hose. At least 190 lawsuits have been brought against these executive actions. Even keeping count is challenging. A website by Lawfare has a tracker of all of these cases. The judiciary has granted temporary relief from executive action in many of these cases, but the courts aren't set up to govern. And if you're governing by litigation, it's awful. So the flood zone strategy leaves the courts drinking out of a fire hose, giving temporary relief. And I just can't stress enough how vulnerable we are when governance is by litigation. So a way to think about all of these executive orders, I put them into three buckets. One is there are constitutional and legal issues. Another are normative violations. We talked about the Department of Justice. That's a normative violation, but it's a hard-baked normative violation. And then there's another bucket, just bad governance. So here are some things that raise constitutional issues and legality issues. Birthright citizenship, the onslaught on birthright citizenship. Defying court orders, definitely illegal. Deporting without due process, definitely illegal. Well, and then we have the firing of bureaucrats without cause, and totally contrary to civil service law. We have some First Amendment victories, but with law firms who have contested Trump's pressures. We have victories in the media and others, but I can't again stress how much, even when there are judicial victories, you've got a chilling effect. There's fear of prosecution, there's fear of being held out as an example. Then we have the normative violations. We have, I'll just skip to the bottom of this slide, the prosecution of Jim Comey, and we may see that case. It's unlikely that it would be dismissed before even a motion for dismissal. It could be possible given the evidence that's there, but I would be very surprised if that case wasn't dismissed. We've just never had such obvious, and it's all in plain sight with Trump, targeting prosecution. And then we just have bad governance. The ways that Musk did his thing, some of it was illegal, some of it just really bad governance. So what are the guardrails on executive authority? I know you're probably surprised that I'm quoting Milton Friedman. But he said, only in crisis, actual or perceived, produces change. When the crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around. That, I believe, is a basic function, to develop alternatives to existing policies to keep them alive. Well, I use that quote because it can cut in two ways. After the January 6th tragedy, Bob Bauer, a prominent Democratic lawyer, and Jack Goldsmith, a prominent Republican academic, wrote a book, Trump Resurrecting the Presidency. And 400 pages, 50 plus concrete proposals on reform that could have been the positive direction of the Milton Friedman having a plan lying around. But unfortunately, those proposals did not flourish because of our partisan environment. Nothing happened, and the legal proceedings became Trump as a martyr. And I'll just say parenthetically, I was just chairing a conference on prosecuting heads of state. And I hope that we learn from the impeachment and prosecution of Trump that we've got to think very carefully about whether to impeach or not. You may have a really strong legal case and lose the political case. And if you look comparatively, about a third of Latin American heads of state have been prosecuted. And it's a very, very mixed record. In fact, my takeaway from that conference was, if you're going to prosecute a head of state, you better think it through really carefully, because it can blow up in your face. And that's what we found. And there are two ways that it can blow up in your face if you prosecute a head of state. One is the martyr thing, which Trump played extremely well. The other is you risk institutionally that executives may not step down for fear of prosecution. So, anyway, a bit of a digression, but so instead of the reforms that Bob Bauer and Jack Goldsmith proposed, we have Agenda 2025. That was the reform proposal lying around. So the Milton Friedman idea can cut both ways. So here are guardrails to constrain power. I've gone too long. the courts, the bureaucracy, the markets, the media, public opinion, and mass protests. The federal courts have done a remarkably good job. They've struck down about 80% of Trump's actions, and the Supreme Court has upheld about 80% of Trump's actions. I'm now becoming a nerd reading lower court decisions because the judges are absolutely courageous. I've never seen so much conflict. The lower court judges are frustrated with the Supreme Court, and they're writing about it in their opinions. And even within the Supreme Court, I've never seen the conflict so out in the open. There was a judgment last week about withholding foreign assistance. Actually, it wasn't a judgment. There was no judgment. It was one of these shadow docket cases where the court simply, granted a stay in execution of a lower court order. And Elena Kagan wrote a dissenting opinion saying, we haven't even had a conference about this. This is a case that's far more consequential than many of the cases that we have on our merit docket for the next term. And we're just deciding these cases in the dead of night. Sonia Sotomayor and Jackson have also been very public in their dissents. It looks like in the next term, the president is going to get what he wants, that is overturning Humphrey's executor, where there was deference given to experts within the bureaucracy. It looks like Trump is going to get his firing at will power. And this idea that expert advice doesn't matter in a complex bureaucracy is really serious. Now, markets is something that Trump will respond to. When interest rates went up in the bond market, he had to change course because that's a disaster for the U.S. economy. We'll see that economists are just baffled by the tariffs. We'll see what happens there. The labor market, employers from Kentucky to California need laborers. So, and consumer confidence is low. But I do think that the markets will continue to be something of a guardrail as we look for hope. The media's been well advertised, well covered. There have been heroic investigative journalism articles by Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Politico, and others. But worry about further media consolidation with the deal with Larry Ellison and his son. So is there hope? Federal judiciary, there's definitely hope. Public opinion is not healthy, let's put it that way. But it's hard for me to discern. In usual political times, you'd say, yeah, this is going to be big trouble for Trump. But we're not in usual political times. We've got a cult that doesn't respond as immediately to accountability concerns as you would hope. And then there's public opinion about the budget. And I do see some hope here in the government shutdown and the healthcare issue that's been put out there. But there are a lot of local services that are at stake here. Investigative journalism, mass protests, and of course what the League of Women Voters works on for so long and tirelessly, the ballot box. And this group doesn't need this quote. You've got a slogan, democracy is not a spectator sport, but I thought I'd leave you with this one that comes from a speech. Ronald Reagan had some of the most phenomenal speechwriters, and this is an excerpt on fighting for freedom. Thank you very much. So let's, please, any questions, comments? Yes.
Thank you so much for this. I learned a lot, and I'm really grateful that I made the time to come. I think you could probably talk to us for about 5 hours.
Yeah, I'm sorry I went way over time.
It's quite all right. I mean, where to begin? I guess what keeps you up at night, and like where do you think we're going to be in the end of this term, this presidential term?
Well, we've got midterm elections.
Could you repeat the question?
Please, we can't hear.
Oh.
Thank you.
Here. Let's do this.
Okay, thanks. I asked what keeps him up at night, and where does he think we're going to be at the end of this presidential term?
All of the above keeps me up at night. It's hard to disaggregate that much. I'm really worried about the Department of Justice. I think I'm worried about the Federal Reserve. I think that if we undermine our standing as we've got the best central bank in the world, and central banks do highly technical things. If you don't respect expertise, it's not the place to be. But Trump could really undermine our economic standing in the world if he's trying to politicize the Federal Reserve. And that's the problem with central banks in developing countries, is the encroachment of the political. I'm concerned about our civility. There's a normalization of death threats that I find shocking. And I would be in favor of prosecution on threats that are made over social media is not easy. It has to meet a constitutional standard that I think needs to be revised to make sure that people are dissuaded, and prosecutions. Unlikely in the Trump era that there'll be prosecutions on death threats and the like, unless they're made against Republicans, maybe. But that sort of thing. All of this really keeps me up at night. It's all too familiar to me. The U.S. has not lived through as many convulsive periods, certainly not in the modern era, as many convulsive periods as people in developing countries. This is familiar to people in developing countries, but the American public is not sufficiently mobilized. I guess that's, compare it to Brazil and what happened in Brazil with Bolsonaro. Now, you don't know if this will come back. Maybe the court overreached a bit, but the public was solidly behind getting Bolsonaro out of office and making sure that he didn't come back. And that mobilization for democracy, you see it in Brazil. We just saw it in Moldova, which really gave me chills. I know the president of Moldova. She's uncorruptible, and Russians were just pouring money into the Moldovan election, and still she won over 50% of the vote, and the Russian party only won 25% of the vote. There I should have taken some, I have to go outside the country for a little bit more hope. The Polish election, highly consequential, where they got a party out of power that was really awful. People in Georgia, I have former students in prison in Georgia, in Venezuela, in other places, but they're fighting. and they're taking the fight. And America isn't to that level. It's hard to imagine that America would be at that level with a level of partisanship, but that's a long answer to. There's a lot to stay up with. I wish we had more of a foundation of trust within the country, and it's hard to do all of these things above it with legal formality when there isn't trust, when there isn't agreement on norms, when there isn't agreement on the basic direction of the country. Yeah. Oh, here. Both of them. I think you can then just pass it on.
So you had that slide about evidence and how it proves certain things, and I think there was 4 bullet points on there. One was gun laws are helpful for gun safety. I think another was death penalty, and the third was climate change. I don't remember what the 4th bullet was.
It was who won the 2020 election.
Oh, that's why I didn't remember. It's so ridiculous. But here's the thing. It seems like a large number of voters in America don't believe things that there's clear evidence for. And that's due to them being in certain bubbles, and social media has not helped that. And you touched on this with trust, right? So I don't know if it's lack of trust causing people to go into their bubbles, or the fact that social media has sort of created this this area where you can literally only see news that you are already predisposed to agree with. And I'm actually a policy lead at Google, and we do tend to be very careful when we draw the lines around misinformation, and then we do allow for things like debate and climate change. So that is a long comment, and my question is, how do we even live in this world where people don't believe things based on evidence?
We're in a post-enlightenment era, and it is difficult. There's no simple answer on the building of trust. When the internet first came about, after internet came about, but when it became widely available, Larry Diamond, my friend at Stanford, started a program on liberation technology. We thought that the internet would make citizens better informed, and that we would just have an informed electorate making much wiser decisions. But of course, it cuts both ways, doesn't it? And I think, well, this is my opinion. I'm not going to give you any data on this, but I think generally social media has been really undermining a lot of what we should be coming to terms with and basic trust.
Algorithms will show me what I want to see.
Yeah.
Like they'll show me that.
Encouraging stereotyping and among other things. But I have no brilliant answer to it. And I wish that content moderation, Meta and suspending content moderation to the extent that it has been, and you know more about this than I do, I think is really tragic. And I think that we need to take another look at, what freedoms are impinging freedoms. Because we're this idea of the First Amendment and free speech being absolute has been the holy grail in America, and I think it needs to be re-examined.
I was going to ask if you could speak a little bit about the executive relationship with the military outside of the National Guard. We've seen that, because I guess maybe that's what keeps me up at night. What's to keep him from having military in the back pocket?
Yeah, thank you for raising that. Chuck Breyer, Steve Breyer, former Supreme Court Justice Steve Breyer's brother, is a federal district court judge in San Francisco. He wrote a brilliant opinion on the involvement of the military and National Guard in Los Angeles, which through the shadow docket was was dismissed by the Supreme Court. And I think this horrible display we saw this week with 800 generals who actually deserve a Medal of Honor for the restraint that Trump didn't seem to understand that it is a hard-baked norm within the military senior ranks to not, applause a campaign rally. In fact, H.R. McMaster, a retired general at Stanford, never voted while he was an active service member. That was the standard and the norm. But this idea of, we're taking out Venezuelan ships purportedly with drug cartel members, no due process, no evidence. It's really tragic. So there's a lot to worry about with the invasion of cities too. This horrible idea of we're going to use the U.S. military to go city to city. Of course, that's targeted to certain populations for utterly political purposes. So thank you for reminding me. I thought I'd said enough about what kept me up at night, and then you remind me of this distortion of the role of the military in our society.
I was just reading Roman history, and it's like, been there.
So it's my perception that there's societally a big disconnect between process and results. And lawyers are in the process takes time, people aren't patient. I think increasingly in the 21st century, there's no patience and people want results right away. That seems to me has led to a lot of pragmatic decision making on the part of law firms, universities, businesses, to say, well, this would not necessarily agree with this, but let's get it done with, let's get it out of the way so that we can just move on and move with our agenda. To me, that almost more than anything else is undermining any ability of resistance. And so the question is, and I don't expect you to have an answer to it, is how do you create backbone in our other institutions and organizations, maybe outside the government, because the government doesn't have a lot of ability to make policy separate from the president, to not back down and to say we're going to accept the short-term dislocations of resisting because in the long term we think that's better. How do you move institutions to think that way? Because they don't seem to be.
Jimmy Kimmel was a lightning rod.
People took out their Disney, it was a market Disney. People left Disney because, and then he came back.
Right. This collective action, if I was in another country and advising it, I'd say, well, could we develop a code of conduct, voluntary code of conduct that people will sign up for, and you'll be marketed as such. The law firms that came to Trump, there were a lot of different reasons among the law firms, as you know, Tom. But my students aren't going to those firms. There's a huge reputational hit, and some of the really well-qualified lawyers within those firms are splintering off to start their own. So there is this sort of voting with your feet on principle. I just wish it could grow, and I share your frustration. I can't say any more about it. Well, and universities with resources need to be leaders. Harvard, Stanford can take hits, but there are a whole slew of academic institutions that deserve to stay in business that are highly, highly vulnerable. So those with resources, and that's another problem with our times, how many billions do you need? unfettered avarice. It's hard to imagine, but yeah, those with resources should need to be the leaders. But I wish I had a better answer.
I can just project, you don't need to. So that really is one of the things I wanted to ask.
No, you can't.
Oh, so can you
I got the room until 11:30, so we can continue to ask questions.
So I wanted to follow up on that because I think the one thing we can count on is people. And I feel like we're doing a worse job this time than we did during Trump 1 in terms of boycotting and mobilization. So for example, how many people here have really limited or stopped buying on Amazon? Okay, well then we're probably unusual amongst the yeah. And how can we get more mobilizations at events? And how? So the question for you is, how effective are mass protests? Is there really? Because those are things we can do. We can boycott. We can tell other people to boycott, and we can march. So, you know, where do you think the power really is?
Economic. So yeah, boycotting being economic protest or protesting now.
Yeah, I mean, we've all witnessed what's been done, and we've all seen that we fall short. I think the U.S. in other developed, now I'm calling the U.S. a developing country, but in other countries, my answer would be more clear, and it's not in the U.S. We don't have Brazil. We don't have that mobilization. We don't have the mobilization even in Moldova with all sorts of Russian resources being. We don't have a sufficient stake, you know, in the democracy and rule of law that we have. And part of that is we've been a stable democracy for a long time. And so, you know, it might take more time for people to really feel the bite.
My question was, what role do major political parties play in upholding the rule of law? Or do they have a role?
Major political parties?
Yeah.
I wish we weren't a duopoly. I wish we had more political parties, but I don't foresee a viable third party in the near future. I don't like where the political parties have gone. I'm obviously a member, well, not obviously, I am a member of one, and I would never be a member of the other in the current environment. But I don't see the political parties. Okay, so people ask me, what would your wish be for a Democratic candidate? We need a Democratic candidate who has a substantial amount of charisma. And charisma is going to be key to the election. I don't know who that would be. I think Gavin Newsom has charisma, but he's from California, and he has a record that some nationally will not appreciate. Josh Shapiro, the governor of Maryland, the governor of Michigan. But I'm not actually answering. Well, I guess I did answer your question. But charisma is you know, it's a treasured historic thing that good leaders do. I'm just going.
So that's a good segue to what I was thinking, which is, I wish I'd paid more attention in school. States' rights. What can states do, and does that offer as any protection that, say, a country that doesn't have that structure, are we better off because we've got states' rights, and how do we use it?
That's a good question. Federalism might save us in ways. There have been, I didn't mention state courts, but state courts have been taking some decisions. I can recommend a decision out of Hawaii last week that really dressed down the Supreme Court for its fanciful methodology and originalism, and you know, rendered a decision that I think will hold up. So states are part of the whole, but that also cuts both ways. I'm going to go over here.
First off, thank you for this. This is enlightening, but also as a student and scholar in international relations, we spend a lot of time on norms. And the normative change that we look for, I'm sure you've looked for in the countries that you've worked in, and maybe I've studied. About 1/3%, once you get that normative change, that then becomes the new norm. It tumbles, as they call it. And you've said that there's some certainty to some of the norms with the judicial, but 1 out of 3 of not following rule of law, we're in that normative change right now. So could you just address how we're supposed to manage that? Because that's here.
No, it's a really good point, and it's heartbreaking for me to see. I mean, Tom, did you ever think you'd see court orders not followed, ignored, not even explicitly?
But at a rate where it can tumble.
Yeah, I think, you know, I hope we're not at a tipping point. We're at a tipping point, and we've got some awful Supreme Court jurisprudence to encourage that tipping point to continue on. Oh, you've been patient.
Thanks very much. Just a segue to a different part of our problem. Third term, where everybody says, well, we'll just live out these 3 years, these next 3 years. But Trump is very serious about it. He's a fascist, he's a dictator, and that's what they do. One of the Supreme Court justices, and I wish I remembered which one, stated that there is no ruling. It's never come before the courts about the 2-term limit and whether it is consecutive or not. And given the way the Supreme Court is ruling, and you just said Supreme Court jurisprudence is really questionable these days, what do you think?
You know, I wish I could take things off the table. Birthright citizenship, third term. What worries me more than a third term is this idea of executives not leaving office and staying in office. And we saw the danger in 2020. But I wish we could take it off the table in the current environment. In a previous environment, say even 10 years ago, it wouldn't be an issue. I guess that's a good measure of how uncertain.
Before the Supreme Court right now, give me a guess as to how they would rule.
Well, so Alito and Thomas are hardcore partisans. And the other 4 in the majority try to appear less partisan, but Trump has a 21 case winning streak on the shadow docket. So, you know, it's hard in legal scholarship. You don't want to read partisanship into. I think the record just shows a very, very partisan court. So, but a third term can't take it off the table. Yeah.
Going back to your slide about hope, the one that I want more information about is budget, because I see veterans who voted for Trump. What are they going to do when they have fewer resources? And Medicare and Medicaid, aren't there Trump supporters that believe all that stuff and are going to feel that?
Yeah. You know, without a doubt, there's a school of thought in political science. It's called rational choice, and rational choice theory was dominant in political science, but it assumes rational action. So those who are the victims of Trump's policies, because it's a cult, and this is why it's so difficult to read politically. You know, maybe there'll be some movement, but we've got 26 to 30% of the voting public who will just walk over a cliff with the president. So I hope that some rationality takes hold. Independent voters, I think, will definitely move in away from Trump. Definitely. The MAGA group, I just don't know. The MAGA group is the group that benefits the most from having another party in office. So.
I just heard this morning that the administration has approved a different medical abortion bill, and the right for whom that is their thing is all aghast. So maybe if he offends parts of his coalition sufficiently.
Yeah, where are those who are offended by that going to go? They have nowhere else to go, which is a problem. You know, Marjorie Taylor Greene. Who would have thought? Who would have thought Marjorie Taylor Greene? And the Epstein case, which, you know, I don't have much interest in, but I had no idea how the MAGA world and the conspiracy theories around the Epstein files had grown to such an extent. And it doesn't matter. You know, you could say Trump's trying to do all sorts of things to distract from the Epstein files, and it's not working, and it's sticking. And Marjorie Taylor Greene, really. So I guess there's hope of some fracture. If I should have had that on the hope slide, you know, Marjorie Taylor Greene. Who would have thought?
Ted Cruz and FCC.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So there could be some fragmentation, and maybe it can snowball, but I don't know.
As you spoke about Chief Justice Roberts and what his direction used to be, and then the word wants just stood out to me when you said, now he wants. And I think of this one man and all of us, and then I think of the personalities in the administration who were not elected, like Russell Buck and Stephen Miller and others. The power of these individuals and what they want and believe. Do you see any constraints or solutions for the Supreme Court? People talk about expanding it. Anyway, these forces are all in play.
Yeah. I don't see the Supreme Court composition changing. The problem with partisanship is it's really hard to move on fundamental issues of reform. So I don't see hope in changing the composition, expanding the court and the like. And actually, there could be unintended consequences from doing that as well. My hope, this is a matter of hope, and I'm going to end on this. So we have Trump versus the U.S. That case never would have been decided that way if a Democrat was in office. But we've got that as precedent. So, you know, watch out what you wish for. You're going to have a Democratic president with the precedent of Trump versus the U.S. And then we'll see what happens. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Erik, for sharing your scholarship and insights with us. I think we have a token of our appreciation.
Wow.
Yeah, there you are. Look at the numbers. It's given us a lot to think about. Great set of slides we can look at again, we have a recording of it. And again, thank you so much for spending your morning with us.
Sure, absolutely. It's my pleasure. Good luck to you in all of the important work you're doing. I happen to live with one of the actors in this, so I know how important the work is, and I know how hard you work at it. So thank you very much.
Okay, so our next event actually is going to be, we're participating in the No King's Day 2 on October 18th. So anybody who's interested in tabling with us or showing up, we'll be tabling at Rinconada Park from 1 to 4. If you can spend some of your afternoon manning that table, that would be great. We're going to do both voter registration and tell people what's on the ballot, and also talk about some issues like due process and free speech and how we're being attacked. Because the league, the National League, has spoken out extensively about many of the administration's policies that are absolutely opposed to what the league believes and what democracy stands for. So send us an email, or if you know any of us, let us know that you might be interested in showing up on the 18th.
And sign
of
up
October.
to help us with these issues. Yeah.
Yes, sign up to help us with these issues. We have a number of committees that are working on issues. We've got a gun violence prevention committee, we've got a natural resources committee, we've got a housing and transportation committee, and a local campaign finance committee. And we all have, each of these committees have a set of goals that they would like to work on for the coming year. You're invited to join any of them, or if you have a particular interest that might align with a league policy position. We have many people in the state of California or around the U.S. who are part of the healthcare interest group for the state, for the league. So if healthcare is something that you're interested, you can actually start an interest group or committee with us. So thank you all for coming.
Eat some snacks, drink some coffee.
Yes,
I have a lot of food. Is there something I could do on the evening of October 7th if I'm curious about the election coming up?
October 7th in Cupertino at the Quinlan Center, there's going to be an in-person candidate forum and pro-con for Santa Clara County. The Santa Clara County League is putting that on. If you can't make it at 7 p.m. to the Quinlan Center in Cupertino, they will be recording it, and the recording will be made available for community groups who want to see who's running for county assessor. There are 4 candidates, and who want something more in depth about Prop 50 and Measure A. So yes, October 7th is also coming up. Santa Clara County League of Women Voters. Okay, thank you all for coming.